Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to another LCA Recording Studios video. Today we're going to be looking at how to make your very own Brooklyn Nine-Nine style intro that looks like this. Now, first thing you're going to want to do is bring in your footage. You want to choose one that has a good establishing shot of the person, close enough to where you can tell who they are, and still enough to where it's not too blurry and you can see what they're doing. So for mine, I just chose a clip of Tom Holland. Just going to click and drag that into the media pool, change the project frame rate. Now that I have that, click and drag it onto my timeline like so. Select it, click the unlink button up here, select the audio, and delete it. Next, you want to find the part where you want, so right before it cuts to this scene. So I'm just going to hit Command B to split, select, and then delete to get rid of that. Next, I'm going to find this part where I want it to do the freeze frame effect. Right there looks pretty good. He's looking at the camera. We can see what he's doing. It's not too blurry, so I'm going to select my footage, hit Command B again, select the second part of my footage, go to speed change, and hit the snowflake button over here. And by the way, if you don't have your inspector on, it's just this inspector icon up here in the top right-hand corner to toggle that on and off. So speed change, hit the little snowflake, and that'll just make this freeze frame. So now we have this. I'm just going to drag it out a little bit more so it's a little bit longer. And that's looking pretty good. So now that I have this, I'm just going to select the two of them. Right-click, say New Fusion Clip. And now that we have this, we can head on into Fusion down here. Okay, so now that we're here in the Fusion tab, we have Media in 1 selected here, which is just our clip. Before we get started, we're going to want to clean this up a little bit. So if you notice, when I drag my nodes around, they kind of line up with this grid automatically. And so to do that, you're just going to right-click, say line up all tools to grid to start with. So if you'd move them around a little bit to begin with, now they're going to be aligned with the grid, and then arrange tools and then select to grid, and that's just going to keep them there so that if you move it around, it'll stay nice and aligned with that grid, and it'll just stay a little bit nicer when we're working with it. So now that we have that, we're just going to deselect, and we're going to select the media in 1 and then click this line that's being piped into the media out 1. That's going to disconnect them. We're going to add a background node right here, pipe it into the media out 1. Right now, we just want to take the output of the media in 1 and put it into the output of the background 1. And what that does is it makes a merge right here, just kind of a shortcut that'll save you some time. So now that we have that, you can see that this is being merged over the background 1. And we do that just to keep things looking nice. Weird things can happen if your project is set to like a 4K timeline and then this is like a 1080p clip. Weird things can happen, so it's always good to just put a background before everything. Move down to alpha to 0 so that it's just clear. In order to get the Brooklyn Nine-Nine style effect of the color being behind him, we need to mask out the person that we have in our foreground here. So what that does is it's going to put the color that we have, it's going to put it behind them. In order to do that, first we just need a polygon node. So we're going to come over here into our little node library that we have here. Next to this circle icon, we're going to click on this. It says polygon, and now it shows up and it's a blank screen. In order to avoid this, you're going to want to check this little box that says invert, and that will bring up what we want. So we want to be able to see what's happening here as we mask him out. We want to go to the point where he first freezes. So for me, it looks like right here at measure 30 is when he stops moving. Zoom into a good spot to start masking, and then just start tracing him out. Just clicking and adding little segment here of the line. We want this to be pretty precise, so you want to mask him out. And the reason you don't want a clip with a lot of motion blur is because that can be really hard to tell where the person ends and where the background starts. So you want a nice still clip where you can clearly see what they're doing, and it's a lot easier to mask. just start masking them out, and then when you're done, come back and start the video again. Okay, so right here, I almost have them entirely cut out. And then when you get to the end, just hit the first segment that you started with right there. And so now, because we had this invert checked on this polygon, now it has the opposite of what we want. It masked everything out around him except for him. And so he's just a blank in the middle of the screen. So what we're going to want to do to fix that is just unchecking the invert box, and then now we have a clip of Tom Holland right there. And so what we're going to want to do to bring the background in, because we don't want that totally gone, we're just going to copy media in one. Using Command V, we pasted it over here. And then we're just going to merge it back over using the trick that we learned earlier. And so now we have everything that we need to start doing it. And so it looks like that was kind of a redundant step doing that. But if we bring in a background color right here, I'm going to merge it over this one. Bring down the blend a little bit. We can see that we have some background color, but we also have the background that he's in, which is similar to the Brooklyn Nine-Nine style, where you can still see the background a little bit, but it's primarily the background color. So now that we have this, you're going to want to pick a color that looks attractive to you. Select the background node, hit color. You can pick any color you want. I'm going to choose Midnight. I just think it looks nice. And that's what we had in the sample video. And so now we have this, which looks good except for these black bars at the bottom. So after our initial mask right here, we can bring in another background, merge it over, go up here to this rectangle mask, and then it'll show up with this like green box thing that we have here. We can drag this to the right so that it's like the length of the screen, maybe go a little bit over just to be sure. Drag it up to the top where the black bars begin. If yours has this, if it doesn't, don't worry about it. But if you want to add them, this is how you do it. And then we just hit invert, and then now we have our black bars again. This looks pretty good, but the image looks flat. There's no change in the background color. It just looks pretty flat. And so one thing that we can do to kind of help this, copy our media in one again, paste it, merge it over. Actually, we're going to want to take this out. So grab the merge and hit shift to take it out of line. Move it up, out of the way. Move this one back over. Bring this down, hit shift to add it into our pipeline here. Then you can check that it's done that. Oh, I guess it hasn't. You can check that it's done that though by moving it around, and if it works, then you'll be able to see that. And we can do another polygon while the media in is selected. And then this time we're going to want to take our little brush here, and we're going to want to make a bigger mask that's not nearly as precise around our figure. So we're just going to want to trace like a bigger mask around our figure like that. We're going to go to the inspector with the polygon 2 selected. We're going to increase this soft edge amount, and that looks a lot nicer. So now we have a background that isn't quite as flat. There's a little bit of a halo around them, but you can still tell like in places down here that we masked them out and did a nice job of it. So you can play with it a little bit, play with the soft edge amount just to get it somewhere that works for you. But if we go back to like frame 0, things start to look a little weird. We should probably go back and we can rename this merge by hitting F2 on your keyboard or right click, rename. In the Brooklyn Nine-Nine intro, you can see that the background color kind of fades in a little bit when the freeze frame happens. And so in order to get that effect, the freeze frame starts on frame 30 for me. And so I'm going to want to do a keyframe with this merge selected. I want to go to Inspector, bring up where it says blend right here. I'm going to click this little diamond icon, and what that does is it adds a keyframe. I'm going to bring the blend all the way down to 0, so it looks like that. And so what this keyframe does is it tells the computer that it should look exactly like this at this point in time. And so if we go forward a few frames, so I'm going to go maybe to frame 34, we're going to drag this blend up a little bit, and you can see that another keyframe was automatically added here. And so this was telling us that at this point in time, we want it to look like this. And at this point in time, 4 frames later, we want it to look like this. And then the software automatically figures out that, okay, what's a good way that we can get it between these 2 points. And so it'll result in it fading in like that. Now we just need to add the text and the text background. Here, I'm going to rename this one real quick. So I'm going to call this one Soft Edge. I'm going to call this Mask. Now we have the soft edge in our mask, and in between these, we want my background node here, merge it over. I'm just going to take this rectangle icon again. While this background is selected, click that. Looks kind of like the rectangle that goes behind them in the Brooklyn Nine-Nine intro. So I'm just going to make it a little bit skinnier here. I'm going to drag this over a little bit. And so now we just need to make it the same color. We're going to go to background, select it, and then I know mine's midnight, but you can always use like the color dropper. That looks pretty boring though, because it's just straight across. In the Brooklyn Nine-Nine intro, they're kind of like tilted, the rectangles. So in order to get that effect, we're gonna select the background, shift spacebar, and then type in XF on our keyboard, and then that'll bring up a transform. And so what a transform allows you to do is move things around, but while not like affecting the individual item, if that makes sense, or like the mask. We're going to go to the inspector, change the angle a little bit here, just like that. And then you'll notice if we deselect that, the corners aren't going to the very edges of the screen, because what the transform node does, while the rectangle, the corners go to the edge of the screen, with the transform node, it only takes what's in this screen. And so if this goes outside of it, it won't take anything outside of these borders. But what we can do is just click and drag up like that. It makes it a little bit bigger. If we don't want it that thick, we can make it a little bit skinnier like that. Take the transform node, move it up a little bit, and that's looking pretty good. And then that'll be the background that our text can go on. We know that at frame 34, the background color fades in completely, and that's how it's going to be for the rest of the time. And so I want this to come in like a frame or two after that. So I'm going to go to frame like 36. That looks pretty good. Hit the transform node, go to inspector, and then where it says center X, center Y, we're going to click on this, not the pivot X, pivot Y, but the center X, center Y. And this is telling it that at frame 36, we want this text background to be right here. And so now we can go back a couple of frames. So I want it to start moving a little bit before this is completely faded in, just so we can kind of like stagger the times a little bit of when things start to come in. So I'm gonna use this little arrow thing here. I'm just gonna drag it to the side, and then to get it, that effect of it kind of like swooping down from the corner of the screen, I'm just gonna take the top arrow and drag it up so that you can see the motion path that it's on. We'll take it diagonally down into the screen. So now we just need to add the text node. So I'm just going to click text up here in our little node library, click and drag it, merge it over the top because we don't want it behind the background that's going to be on. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're going to click on the text inspector. I'm going to put on caps lock and then just write Tom Holland as. I'm going to add shift spacebar XF and then click add, and then this will just make another transform node. And then we can like move it over to the side, drag it up, and then change the angle. We can actually go look at our text background and see what the angle of that is. So negative 13.0. I'm going to go back over here and make it the same so it lines up nicely. So now we just have to animate it. I'm actually going to animate this one not in the transform node, but in the text itself. So I'm going to go to layout, center Z. What this does is it changes its center in space. So if this is the camera right here, it'll change its proximity to it, like farther away, closer. I'm going to bring it back until the letters are behind the quote-unquote camera, if you will. I'm going to mark a keyframe right here because this is when I'm going to want it to start moving. And then I'm just going to go forward a couple frames in my timeline. And then I'm going to click this little dot here in the middle, and then that's where it would normally be in relation to the camera. So that'll just put it back at frame 0, and now we have something that looks like this. We can go back a couple frames in our timeline. So it starts to fade in, background color comes in, text comes in, and lands nicely on it like that. Now, in our little intro clip there, it said Tom Holland as Ponyboy Curtis, because for mine, I did it Outsiders themed just for school project purposes. That was in a larger text, so I'm just going to grab another text node right here. So we have our text 2 right here. I'm going to merge it over like so. Click on the text 2 and write Ponyboy Curtis. I'm going to change the font over here to something that looks nice. I'm going to bump up the size a little bit like that. While my text is still selected, hit Shift Spacebar, XF to add a transform node, move it over to the side like so. And then I remember from earlier that our angle is 13.0. Move it over to the side here, decrease the size just a little bit so you can see everything. Okay, so for this one, I don't want it to be animated on that center Z again. You can if you want to, but for this one, just to mix things up a little bit, I am going to tell it that at frame 37, we want it to be right there. So I'm going to click on the diamond keyframe here next to center X and center Y. I'm going to go back a couple of frames because we're working a little bit backwards here. And right when like this starts to moving, I'm going to move it over to the side, and I want it to kind of mirror this text background over here. So I want it to kind of slide in the opposite direction from where this one's coming. And so I'm just going to drag it down. And so now we have a nice diagonal motion path here, which is represented by this green line. That looks pretty good, but there's a few things that we can do to kind of spice it up a little bit. And so if you notice, as like the text background and stuff is coming in, it's just very flat. It doesn't look intriguing at all. And so if we were thinking of this in terms of realistically, this would have motion blur if it was like actually coming in behind him. And so we can go to text background, and since this is the thing that's been animated, we can go to settings and click toggle this motion blur over here. And then you can see that that adds some nice motion blur right there. I'm going to bring up the quality to something like 6. That looks pretty good. Bring down the shutter angle, which is just like how far the motion blur goes from the actual object. So something like 119, that looks pretty good. Since the text here is the thing being animated, I'm going to go to settings, motion blur, and then just do the same thing for all of them. So then we can see as it's coming in, has some motion blur, but when it reaches its final destination, it kind of just snaps into place, like it doesn't slow down at all. So one thing that we could do to make this animation a little bit smoother is click on this spline window up in the top of the screen, and we can select everything that's being animated and then hit this button that says zoom to fit. And this is a visual representation of all the animations going on in our image. So we can click and drag to select it all, and then hit F on our keyboard, and then that just makes things a little bit slower. So right here starts off kind of slow, goes faster in the middle, and then kind of slows down at the end. And that'll make it just look a little bit nicer, and so that it's not like snapping into place. And I think that's it. That's looking pretty good. For mine, obviously, I had a lot more people that I did this for, but I basically just did the same thing. I just copy and pasted this. Wow, that's a lot of stuff going on. Took out the mask, made a new one, masked them out, changed the background color, changed like the orientation of the text and stuff, and that's basically it. So this is basically a template that you can use for a bunch of other ones if you're going to do that, and it'll make the process a little bit less time consuming. However, one last thing that we can do to just take it to the next level is add the camera movements that you'll see in the Brooklyn Nine-Nine intro. So right here, I just have my rendered Fusion composition that we made. To do this, you'll probably want to remove the black bars that we made at the beginning of the video just to make things easier. But if you have already rendered it and deleted the Fusion composition, just like I did, then we'll go over how to fix that as well. But in order to do this, we're just going to want to scroll through the timeline, find the part where the freeze frame starts, and hit Command B on my keyboard to split it. Go forward a few frames to where the color is kind of fading in a little bit. Command B it again to split. I'm going to want to take my zoom that I have right here and just increase it just a little bit, and you'll see why the black bars were a problem, because of the top section here. It's kind of like zooming them in. If you compare it to back here in the timeline, it looks pretty weird. Move it over to the side a little bit using these zoom and position XY toggles. And then on this one, we want it zoomed in even more. So I'm going to take this clip, zoom it in, and so now in order to fix these top bars, we're going to come over here to our toolbox adjustment clip right here. Click and drag it into our timeline like that. Go back to the beginning, come to the cropping, and you want to increase the crop top until it just goes slightly past the black bars that we made in the beginning of the video. And then you can do the same for crop bottom, and then now the black bars stay the same and it doesn't look funky. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I did. This was a lot of fun. Let me know in the comment section below if there's any more videos like you'd like to see like this. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.